everyone. Welcome to Book Club. I'm Mr. Derill.
And I'm Mr. Alex.
And today we are going to talk about Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn.
I really like this book, Derill, because this book is all about friendship and adventure, one of my favourite themes to speak about. And I think the reason why the theme of friendship and adventure come through so well is because of the author himself. He is writing from his own experience. He too, like Huckleberry Finn, he lived on the Mississippi River. He saw the circuses which would move around in caravans, which would attract huge crowds. He saw the fights that would happen on the sides of the river. He'd see men die. He'd see slaves being dragged in chains. And this I suppose really made him see how evil men could be as well.
He does seem to have this fighter's sense of justice that he demonstrates very well. Obviously, many people have seen the injustices in 19th century America, but only Mark Twain and others pick up on this and make this their big crusade, fight to overcome.
And perhaps his sense of justice comes from his family. He had a very morally upright mother, a very hard-working father. Although his father was very serious, he said he never saw his father laugh, his father was very hard-working. And I suppose Mark Twain learnt a lot from his parents. He had a very strong family unit.
Well, and I think you can see that in the way family plays out in this novel very clearly.
And I suppose we can't talk about this story without talking about the American Civil War, which happened between 1861 and 1865.
Yes, it was the most brutal war that America had faced up to that time. Millions died, and it literally tore the country apart. It tore it into half. Families were set against each other. Within families, fathers were against sons. The North was against the South. It was a tumultuous, it was a chaotic time.
As you said, the fight was between the North and the South of America. In the North, you had the Unionist army, and in the South, you had the Confederate army. And they were fighting for two very different things. The Unionists believed that all people should have a right to civil rights, and this included slaves. And the reason this was a problem for the Confederates was that Confederates believed in having their own laws, that each state should be able to govern itself. And one of the laws that they had in southern Confederate states was the right to own slaves, to work slaves and to make profit off of slaves.
Which neatly brings up one of the main themes of the book, and that is race relations. Race relations and identity as well, which I think Twain explores in a very intelligent way.
Absolutely, and speaking of race relations, Jim is depicted as a very sympathetic character, which makes us curious, and it makes us ask this question, and perhaps at home we can think about this question as well. Who do we think Mark Twain fought for, the Unionists or the Confederates? Who do you think he fought for?
Well, based on what you've said so far, I would guess he would have fought for the Unionist side, the side that was against racism.
Well, this is the surprising thing. He didn't fight for the Unionists. He fought for the Confederates. And this confused me for a really long time, but then I thought about it. And I thought about the story itself. Perhaps Mark Twain himself had this inner conflict. The same way Huckleberry Finn has this inner conflict, because there's points in the book where, yes, he's friends with Jim, but he also asks himself, should he be helping Jim? Because by helping Jim, he's actually breaking the law. And there's points where he's considering even giving Jim up. So that might have contributed to him being in the Confederate Army. But let's also consider that Mark Twain was from the South. He grew up on the Mississippi River, so there might have been lots of family influence and influence from his friends, which would have caused him to join the Confederate Army.
Yes, it all neatly builds up to a great moral choice that has to be made in the book by Huck, by Jim, by the other characters, and I think Mark Twain does a very good job at bringing that out in this tale.
Absolutely. The next thing to speak about is the setting, the Mississippi River. And again, like we said before, Mark Twain is writing from his experience. So there's something very real about this novel. And as a child growing up, he would have seen the secret islands and places on this Mississippi River, a perfect place for children to play, to go on adventures, to go on mysterious adventures, yeah.
Or at least to dream about it. Yes, the Mississippi River is the great meeting place in a sense. It runs through 10 states, I believe, and it is the great mixing pot in a sense, because you can travel down it and you can see almost half of America or more. And it really is the ultimate American journey, the river. And I think the river is used as a symbol of the journey that Huck takes. So while riding down that river, the river itself is, in a sense, the shape of the book, the movement of the book.
Absolutely. And quite often, the Mississippi River is described as this very calm and peaceful river, a river that is almost dreamlike. But I suppose this is quite deceiving because, of course, they also encounter many troubles and dangers along this river.
Yes, and there are a lot of moral ambiguities, difficulties in his journey, because there are obviously the race relations and friendship complications and so on. So he makes excellent, expert use of this symbol, I think.
Which moves us on to themes, and there are so many themes in Huckleberry Finn, among which we have the theme of freedom, friendship, family, discrimination, and the list goes on, really.
I'd like to start with a fairly simple comparison. We have the boy with a good heart, symbolized by Huck, against the others in his society with the ugly or the deformed conscience. So they think ugly thoughts is what Mark Twain is trying to say. Whereas Huck, the reason we like him so much is that he trusts his heart. He trusts the judgments that his heart makes. And he often has to break from society and break from the expectations that they have on him because he trusts his own heart. So he looks at Jim, and society tells him that he should behave a certain way to Jim. Jim is to be kept away, and Jim doesn't belong on the same social strata as Huck. But Huck looks at Jim and sees a good man. And who does he rely on for that judgment? His own heart. So there's that theme of the boy with a good heart against society's evil ideas.
And since we're speaking about Huck and his development, let's talk about his character's development in more detail. And what I'd like to ask you, Deril, is to what extent does Huck's character actually develop, do you think?
Yes, that's a very good question. I think he doesn't develop too much. He's always he's always the boy. In the end, when he's expected to settle down, Tom Sawyer offers him a chance to settle down. He looks at it, he tastes it for a short while, and he says, "No, I'm not going to have it. I'm back on the road, or in this case, back on the river." And he goes off exploring again, or having adventures, more adventures. So he hasn't really grown up. And so, from my perspective, I would say that he's a bit more of a universal character. He's always that boy who never grows up.
I suppose the one place where he has developed, and it's something you've already mentioned, is his relationship with Jim. And while he had doubts in the beginning about Jim, by the end, the doubts are gone. Jim is his friend. In fact, Jim is even his family. And let's return to this theme of family. And I think this relationship between Jim and Huck is the ideal relationship because of the loyalty that they show to one another. Both of them save each other's lives. And I can think of there's this one really good example, and it also reveals something about Huck's character. They're on the raft. On the raft there's a tent, and suddenly they see two white men on the shore. These are two white men who are looking for runaway slaves to catch them and to give them back to their owners, and they will get a money reward. So the two white men come to the ship and tell it to the raft and tell it to stop. So Huck tells Jim, quickly get into the tent, and when the men come to the raft, they say, you wouldn't happen to have any slaves on your raft? And Huck says, no, it's just my father, he's in the tent. And they say, oh, well, can we come on to the raft and see your father? And this is what Huck says in response, and this is what makes him so intelligent. He says, my father has a terrible, terrible illness. Maybe you can help him. And that's when the white men realize, oh, no, we don't want to come onto this raft. We don't want to get sick. So again, it's showing his intelligence as well.
Using that Huck intelligence to save his friend. That's a very good point. We've looked at books in the past where friendship is a theme, and now we have loyalty as a theme, which is a variation or a change on friendship, but no less important. And Huck certainly symbolizes that. He is the friend to Tom, the best friend that Tom could have, and he's the best friend that Jim could have. So he is very loyal, and that is something that readers can take from the book.
And this character of Huck, what makes him also so likable is the fact that he's actually based on one of the author's friends. And the author's friend was called Tom Blankenship. And just like Huck, this was a free boy, a very poor boy, who didn't go to school, but he was very free. And the author really liked him. Now, this boy's father was also a drunkard, someone who drank a lot, who wasn't very kind. And I suppose that's where the character of Huck's father comes from. But I want to come back to this point about development one more time. Mm-hmm. So while we said he develops loyalty, yes, he doesn't develop responsibility.
Yes.
He goes back on an adventure.
Yes.
And this is quite often a big theme in literature, and we can think of other stories like Peter Pan, the boy who doesn't want to grow up, the boy who doesn't want to become a man and take on responsibility.
I'd agree. So he remains a man-child in a sense. He never grows up. Perhaps Twain is leaving him there as a universal symbol for what he is. So he bridges sort of black culture and white culture. That's another point I forgot to mention, that different kinds of audiences have responded very well to the character of Huck. He's just likable by all because he's sort of free-spirited. Perhaps Twain, in his kind of romantic way, wanted to leave Huck as that boy that's good to everyone, the boy with a good heart, and there was no pressing need to have him grow up.
Absolutely. Which I think moves us on quite nicely to the impact of this novel. And I'd like to ask you, what do you think is the cultural significance of this story? What do you think people reading it at the time would have thought about the story?
They would have seen American race relations from a different perspective. And we know that Mark Twain was very interested in this topic, but he brought something to it that was not just polemics, or not just arguments, or not just dismissals. He shows friendship and loyalty, and that did more to sort of break the way you could look at, let's say, black culture if you're from the white side, or vice versa as well. Common human themes bringing us all together works better sometimes than a lecture or a public dressing down.
Absolutely. And just how, in the same way that this book has a huge influence on the people who read it, next week's book, which will be Wonder, is also about a boy who at first is perceived in a very negative way, but by the end of the book changes everyone's opinion and actually teaches everyone a really important rule. Thank you for joining us today. We will see you next Friday. Thank you.
See you then.